First of all, I'd just like to clarify, this is only for educational purposes. So, starting off right away, we have the Bataan Death March. The Bataan Death March was a cruel act showing the war crimes committed during the Far Eastern War in World War II. Filipino and American soldiers were executed inhumanely. They were stabbed with bayonets, run over with vehicles, buried alive, and killed for no reason at all. The Bataan Death March was one of the worst atrocities of World War II ever listed. With that out of the way, good morning everyone, Nikolai Nash C. Basilio here. I'm here today to express my personal opinion on the Bataan Death March, and this is only for educational purposes. Now, for some background. In the Second World War, after the Imperial Japanese forces had successfully invaded Luzon, the USAFE, or the United States Army in the Far East, were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. General Douglas MacArthur, who was leading the USAFE forces at that time, was ordered directly by the US President Franklin D. Roosevelt to focus on Europe and go to Australia. The Philippine President Manuel L. Quezon also had to depart for the US. Douglas MacArthur had to leave with the famous line,
"I shall return."
President of the Philippines, Manuel L. Quezon, had no choice but to flee for the United States, for if the Japanese would capture Manuel L. Quezon, all efforts of peace in the Philippines or the Commonwealth would be lost. With the USAFE stranded, General Edward King had no choice but to surrender to the Japanese forces without Wainwright's permission. And with this surrender, the blood-stained, starved, and exhausted Philippine and American soldiers would soon face the most gruesome act of war crime there is ever recorded in history, the Bataan Death March. For 11 days, they marched without food, without water, without rest, endlessly. They marched unwillingly to Camp O'Donnell as prisoners of war. Several war crimes would be committed during this time, which include, if American soldiers were ever to be found lacking behind, they would either be shot in the head, buried alive, strangled, drowned, run over by vehicles. Such inhumane treatments. When they started, there were 36,000 POWs, and when they finally reached the final train, there were only 18,000 of them. Many perished. The Japanese Imperial forces did not provide food, water, or even rest to the American and Filipino POWs during that time. Many POWs had become so desperate as to drink sewage water, and to even go as far as to drink muddy water. With the several bacteria and pathogens present in the water they drank, they felt even more pain. More pain, suffering, torture. It was endless for the American soldiers there. But firstly, let me clarify. In the Battle of Bataan, the USAFE forces were cornered by the Imperial Japanese forces. The Imperial Japanese forces were not expecting as much resistance as they had. So, the Imperial Japanese forces treated the USAFE forces with such uncruel, inhumane torture. Those who fainted during the march were buried alive. Their final destination was Camp O'Donnell, a prisoner of war camp. General Edward King of the United States forces even tried to talk to the commanding leader of the Japanese forces, Masahiro Homa, to let the Americans ride on American vehicles in order to reach Camp O'Donnell. But Masahiro denied for no actual reason. And once again, let me clarify again, these are just my opinions. I'm not trying to be rude. I'm not trying to give an obligatory statement. This is for educational purposes. The Japanese leadership of Masahiro Homa in the Philippines was simply torturous, rigorous, and unfair. They even said, I mean quote, the reason for the Bataan Death March by the Japanese forces is to decrease their numbers, and rations should only be provided to Japanese forces, which in every single instance that General Edward King requested for more humane treatments of the American soldiers, Masahara denied every single one of them any fair treatment. Later, after the war, Masahara Hama would be tried by the Supreme Court as a war criminal and be executed via firing squad. The Bataan Death March had no reason to exist at all. The Bataan Death March was simply an act of cruelty, done because of ideological differences within the Japanese and the Yusafi forces, and because of their cultural beliefs. Although, believe it or not, the Bataan Death March was gruesome, torturous, and it had no reason to exist, but there are some good things that came out of it, believe it or not. For example, many families actually got acquainted because of the Bataan Death March. Many of the soldiers had met their forever in the Bataan Death March, because in the Bataan Death March, the local Filipinos would provide food, water, and nutrition to the marching US soldiers and Filipino soldiers, and some even met their forever in there. Another one that's a good thing, inspired by the Bataan Death March, is the calls for better human treatment, such as the Geneva Convention, for example. Furthermore, as we know, modern Japan nowadays is a great and prosperous country with great hospitality. But why is this? Because, first of all, I'd just like to clarify that some people identify the Emperor of Japan during World War II, Emperor Hirohito, as a war criminal. But can we truly say this if even he felt the guilt of World War II, especially of the war crimes committed? Even if some of the war crimes committed, he even felt personally responsible for some of the actions. And at least he even made the attempt to correct his mistakes. Overall, the Bataan Death March was so gruesome, torturous, and such a war crime spree. There were many lives lost, such harsh torture, pain, and endless suffering. But you've got to admit it, without the Bataan Death March, many of the things we know and love wouldn't exist, and I earnestly hope that the horrors of war shall never be continued again. Anyways, once again, I'm Nikolai Nash C. Basilio. Thank you for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell. Well, anyways, goodbye! And once again, I shall state once more that those atrocities that happened in history are in fact in the past, and we should thus far learn from them, but also move on. Thank you for watching the video. What is important now is that we have made peace, and we shall all cooperate in this wonderful society. Well, anyways, goodbye everyone! See you in the next video.